Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, where I'm going to have an unusual day, and I'm going to immediately introduce my co-host, Chad Oban, because I usually forget. But Chad, coming out, firing. That's how on top of my game I am today. I'm going to remember.
We should revisit this at the end of the hour to determine if you really are on the top of your game or not.
We'll do a little scorecard at the end of how I did. My co-host, Chad Oban. Our guest is State Representative Jim Jonas from West Fargo. He's a Republican. And the reason we have him on the show is we are going to talk about party resolutions. And the reason why this is important, and resolutions occupy kind of a weird space, I think, in North Dakota politics. Because on one hand, let's be honest, not a lot of people are paying attention to that process. There's not a lot of people showing up to it. In the past, I think it would be fair to say not a lot of people paid attention to it at all, which is how we ended up, I believe it was, I want to say 2020, where the NDGOP had a resolution that had some language about the LGBTQ community that just pretty much every statewide Republican ended up having to disavow. Governor Burgum, the congressional delegation, John Hoeven, Kevin Kramer, Kelly Armstrong, down the list, came out and condemned that language. And now, we're in 2024. And the reason why I say it's an odd spot is because sometimes these things get media attention, but also there's a lot of talk about needing to be absolutely loyal to the Republican platform. There's people that they want like loyalty oaths. They want to do scorecards about how much fidelity lawmakers have to the platform. Well, when we pass these resolutions, that's the platform. Now, for those of you who don't know, essentially what a resolution is, the party has a platform, and the platform is kind of a statement of broad principles. We believe in limited government. We believe in ethical government, things like that. And then what gets added to that every year is a list of resolutions that are essentially much more specific policy statements. And some of them are about what you expect. We support school choice. We support, we're pro-life, things like that. The problem is that the language in some of these gets a little rough. And that's why I wanted to bring Jim Jonas on. Recently, we had some headlines about one in particular concerning abortion, although there's a number of resolutions in there that I think we're going to talk about. But one in particular, it said some things about abortion that I think are a lot of Republicans maybe don't agree with. For one, talking about putting women in jail or anybody who helps a woman get an abortion in jail, or charging them with a felony. That's some tough language. Also, the language in there talking about life starting at fertilization. Normally, when you hear a pro-lifer talk about this, they say life begins at conception. Life beginning at fertilization speaks to maybe the IVF controversy we're seeing on the national stage, where a court in Alabama ruled that their law would essentially perhaps prohibit IVF treatments, even though a lot of pro-lifers say they don't want to stop IVF treatments. So here we have this resolution that's going to be voted on. I should mention this resolution is not passed. It's been approved by the Resolutions Committee. It's been approved by the NDGOP State Committee. The full NDGOP State Convention, the delegates there will take it up and vote on whether or not this is going to be part of the party's platform. But this process, and I think we're going to talk about this with Representative Jonas, I think it leaves much to be desired. But Jim, first of all, anything to correct there? I want to characterize this fairly. Am I being fair to this process?
No, you hit it pretty good on the head there, Rob. As far as the platform and the resolutions, I had a good conversation with Mike LaFleur yesterday, and we were talking about this issue. The resolutions are in the election cycle. And they do add a little spice, let's use that word, a little more in-depth than the platform. And they're binding until the next election cycle. So I asked them, what will they become part of the platform? And he said no. So I knew I'd probably get that question today, but with the election going on, the national election, some of the resolutions pertain to some of the issues. But you did a good job on your introduction.
Representative Jonas, there are 10 people that were on this committee. Senator Paulson, you were the co-chair, Amber Babetto from Minot, Mr. Deal, Mr. Bain, Mr. Gwynn, Mr. Glenn, Representative Carls, Representative Rose Christensen, Representative Donna Henderson. You were not able to make the vote. So if you look at the some are unanimous, there's 9 people voting total. What I really struggled with going through these resolutions is these seem to be policy statements that divide the Republican Party more than bring people together. I mean, I look through this stuff and I think Doug Burgum wouldn't agree with 2/3 of these things. A lot of the legislators I talked to wouldn't agree with a big chunk of these things. How is this process beneficial to the North Dakota GOP when so many of the elected officials wouldn't agree with a lot of this stuff in here?
Okay, good question, Chad. I'll expound the process. The 47 legislative districts, the chairman of each district, they get together and they would nominate 2 representatives from the Northeast, the Northwest, the Southeast, Southwest regions, and then they would become part of this committee. And many of the district chairs are compared by my far right friends. And so many of the members of the committee had those views that don't align to the majority of the Republican Party or most people in North Dakota. So that's how that process developed, Chad, I'd say. And out of due respect for my fellow members of the committee, they worked hard. Senator Paulson and Delvin and Amber on the resolutions. And the thing about politics today is we need to be able to sit down and have a good conversation and maybe not agree on all the issues and so forth. And like Rob said, not be bound by that Republican platform. You know, I had a great conversation with Mike LaFleur yesterday and some of my other colleagues in the House on if the GOP comes up, the state party comes up with the idea that you must follow the platform and actually have a committee that oversees the legislature, it's too authoritarian. I'm concerned about what's good for West Fargo and North Dakota, and not necessarily some of the members of the GOP. What's good for Stanley and Williston, North Dakota, isn't always good for West Fargo. So you guys have some valid points there, and I hope I clarified.
No, I think your point about needing to sit down and talk about people. I don't want to block people out who have views that I disagree with from the process. Right. That's not the point here. Like people who think that we should be arresting Uber drivers who drive a woman to an abortion clinic. I don't agree with that. I think that that's backwards policy. I don't think that helps anybody. And in fact, my article about this quoted extensively State Senator Jana Myrdal from the Grand Forks area. Where is she from? She's from Calvin?
Edinburgh.
That's right. I don't know what I'm. Yeah, she's from Edinburgh. And I mean, listen, there's nobody in North Dakota who's been more outspoken on the pro-life issue than Jana Myrdal.
Yep.
And when Jana Myrdal says this goes too far, this is problematic. I guess what my question for you is, Jim, is I'm looking at a process that creates resolutions that some people in the party want to then enforce on all members of the party and say you have to pursue these policy agendas. But it's a very small number of people do it. I mean, even when it goes to a vote of the full convention, and let's say that's 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 delegates, however many end up turning up, that's still a very small number of people relative to the number of North Dakotans. I mean, that number of people, that may be about how many people vote in one legislative district in a primary. So it's a very small group of people that are going to enforce something on all elected Republicans across the state. I feel like that could be a better process.
Yeah. we had that conversation yesterday again with Mike LaFleur, and some people actually want to expand the number of resolutions, and we had 43 total introduced, and 15 it was getting too cumbersome. The process was getting too cumbersome, but there's still that group that wants to have more resolutions. And once again, these are suggestions. I think Sandy Sanford had a quote where she said, these are suggestions. You can follow them and be respectful of everybody's opinion.
Representative Jonas, looking at these, and one of the things that I really struggled with was a lot of the whereases. Generally, when you look at a resolution, the whereases are facts, and then you go to the resolution. The first one on supporting education freedom, Jim, I know you are an educator. You're now a school board member. Your spouse is a professional educator. One of the whereases in here is, and let me just say, Rob Port and I disagree on school choice, and I think we both agree that we shouldn't come at it from this perspective. Whereas, while less than half of American students are proficient in math, science, and reading, government schools are prioritizing social programs that politically and ideologically indoctrinate students. Jim, is that happening in West Fargo schools where we're indoctrinating students?
No, I made a point of that during I was here on Saturday, March 9th out in Bismarck for state basketball, and I was able to attend the subcommittee. And I brought that up. West Fargo, Grand Forks, Fargo, it's not happening.
But if we're starting the conversation around school choice, and you and I have talked about this, Rob and I have talked about it, from a perspective of our public schools are indoctrinating, that's not having a real conversation about the pros and cons of school choice and vouchers and that kind of thing. I don't know how a public school advocate could look at this and be like, the Republicans have my back. So, I mean, as an advocate for public schools and a champion for public schools, how would you respond to somebody who reads this and says, Jim, you're a Republican, you're on this committee. How do you feel about it?
I've already defended this numerous times already. And the people that know me know that I wouldn't adhere to this. And I brought this up in our subcommittee that this isn't happening in our schools. Our schools in North Dakota are great places and so forth. And we're making progress on reading and math and science. Superintendent Baser made a great point the other day. I'm on a task force for school funding, special task force, and we're looking at school choice. And the question was brought up about math scores and reading scores. Think of the old bell curve, right? When we went to school, we have about 10% of the kids that are high flyers, the A's, right? And then 20% or so were the B's. So let's take that's 30% in reading, let's say, okay? Let's just use reading for now. So that 30% are above the proficient or proficient or above. And there's a ton of kids that are right at that line that would be the C kids that we're working to get up to the B level. So that was a great example she had. And school choice is coming back. We're looking at that on our subcommittees. I'm on both education subcommittees, and being an adherent for public schools, we're working on the voucher system. We're looking at the early stages of that now. But you're right. This does take a shot at the public schools, and I can't defend that.
So Jim, you said something a moment ago that it's too authoritarian, and I feel like that's a point I've made. One thing that I think of like a country like Cuba or China or someplace like that, where you have a political party that kind of dominates everything, like the Chinese Communist Party. And essentially to get ahead in government in China, whether you're some local elected official, I'm doing air quotes, or you're part of the like national leadership, there's an expectation that you're loyal to the party. And I look at that, and I think Americans look at that, and that's fundamentally not how we do public service in the United States of America. When you're elected to a school board, or you're elected to a legislative district, or you're mayor, or you're a county commissioner, or you're the governor, you have a constituency of people. And the expectation is, yeah, you've got people who voted for you and people who didn't vote for you, but once you're elected, you represent everybody. Yep. And so what worries me is when we get so wrapped around the axle about these resolutions, and I know this is not your position, and that the position, these are more suggestions or anything else. But I mean, there are people out there who really want to enforce this. And what worries me is that if we're getting to that point where the expectation is you're going to be loyal to the party's resolutions and not what you're hearing on the ground from your constituents and your business leaders and your community leaders and your faith leaders and everybody else who makes up your constituency, I worry that authoritarian, I guess, is exactly the right word. I guess that was you were so apt in using that word. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I'm an old world history teacher. So the Cold War, Communist China, communism, the Politburo, Chinese Communist Party. And when I sit in these meetings and they bring this up, that let's follow the platform. Let's follow the platform. I have it right here. And they want to expound on some of the ideas. Like I said earlier, I'm going to do what's best for West Fargo and the citizens of West Fargo and the citizens of North Dakota. I'm going to vote the way anything that'll help my citizens out, my constituents, and the people of North Dakota. I hope one day the far right, the Democrats, the moderates, consider me a moderate, we get together and we work on infrastructure, education, business, workforce development, avoid the cultural wars. Let's get back to making North Dakota better for our citizens. I do believe the best days are still ahead for us.
Representative Jonas, I think that Rob brought up one of my concerns with this whole thing is that the idea that elected officials have to be tied directly to what the platform of the resolutions say. The reality is where I live, there's 3 legislators. I didn't necessarily vote for them, but I still get to have 3 representatives that advocate for my community. One of them is Representative Carl's, and I see that the support for education freedom passed unanimously. Again, you weren't there for that vote, so the other 9, that means they voted for it. I would just like to encourage Wilmore Elementary School to go to Simley Middle School and go to Bismarck High School, which are in her district, to learn if students are being indoctrinated there or not, because that really frustrates me, the idea that folks on this committee think that students are being indoctrinated. One of the other resolutions that really caught my attention was Resolution 8 on abolishing property taxes. Again, the vast majority of legislators I talked to are very much opposed to this idea. The vast majority of statewide officials are very much opposed to this idea. So I'm surprised. I don't think this represents the vast majority of Republicans, frankly, in the polling I've seen, it doesn't. But one of the things, again, on the whereases are supposed to be facts. And the last whereas is due to massive state government revenues, abolishing property taxes can be accomplished without any loss of discretion of local control by local subdivisions and without any cuts to existing services. That's just not true. There's no scenario where that can be true. I mean, we could do a whereas because Santa Claus told me it's true, and that would be just as factual as this. So again, thinking about these as, I mean, you vote on whereases or resolutions at the legislature, the whereases have to be based in some sort of fact. Like, were these vetted at all, or is it just they got brought forward, the people who were proponents of it brought forward was there wordsmithing that went on? Was there anything like that? Again, this is more of a process question, or is it just sort of the committee looked up or down on these things?
No, as far as I know, there was no vetting of these. It was mostly the opinions of the author. They came before the committee and presented their resolution. And I remember discussing this one too on that Saturday meeting, saying that a lot of people are not going to support this. This is basically in support of Rick Becker's movement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm a no vote on that, and as are many other my Republican friends, because there's just not any safety. It just doesn't explain how revenue would be brought up once the property taxes are done. And we as a legislature have been working on property taxes for the last few sessions, and will continue to do that. But you're right. That does make a statement that the entire party supports this, which it does.
Well, and it also, there's a whereas that basically the legislature has done nothing on property taxes, like the third one. I mean, you mentioned it while you've been there the last two sessions. You guys have worked on this going back for a decade. This has been worked on. So to have the Republican Party basically attacking the Republican legislature for not doing anything on property taxes seems like not the position that the NDGOP should be taking.
I mean, the legislature has been working on something with property taxes for the entirety of my more than 2-decade writing career in politics. I think if I went back, some of the first things I would wrote about the legislature back in the early 2000s would have revolved around property taxes. And we could argue about, well, did they do the right thing? We can have a debate about that, but they've done stuff. And there's a lot of North Dakotans who are confounded about property taxes, but are given pause when it's like, okay, I don't like the status quo, but what do we do? I mean, if we get rid of them, what do we replace it with? Like, how do we continue to fund fire departments and schools and roads and snowplows and everything else?
Yeah. And the thing that's really hurting us is our increased valuation of our homes. When my wife and I bought this house 15 years ago, we got a good deal for $250,000. Nice buy level here. Now I think it's valued at $400,000. So and my responsibility as being a school board member, once again, about 45 to 50% of the tax here in West Fargo is going to our schools, and our schools are exploding here. We're at over almost 13,000 students and growing.
Yeah, Jim, we joke in my office that West Fargo is building a school every 2 weeks because of all the students over there.
Well,
it's a good place to be.
It is. I mean, West Fargo's obviously got a lot going for it. It's a beautiful community. Why do these resolutions matter, Jim? I mean, if they're just suggestions and they come out and it seems like a lot of times they make a lot of negative headlines, and then all of a sudden a lot of Republicans start getting uncomfortable questions about, well, your party says this, how can you, what's the point? I should make a distinction. I like and I understand absolutely the point of having like broad philosophical statements about, we believe in limited government, we believe in this. But when we start getting down and we're almost legislating policy positions, I don't understand the point of that process.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had that conversation yesterday with Mike LaFleur again and several of my other colleagues, and many of them would like to do away with this process and just stick to the basic platform. And I would have no problem with that. I think the reason for them came up with this election cycle. They're bound to each election cycle. So until the next 4 years, we'll be going over that, or 2 years maybe, in terms of the midterms. But I think it's every 4 years we do these. So I would have no problem.
It's my understanding that each of these resolutions, what are there, 15 or 16? Something like that. Each of them are going to be voted on individually by the delegates. So how long? I mean, that's going to be like the. I'm saying this now as I'm going to be sitting in the back. You're going to be there too. We're going to be sitting in this room, voting on these things one at a time. I understand the reason why. Like, you vote them in a group, you don't have a chance to go through and say, well, I like 2 of these, but I don't like 4 of them or whatever. Holy cow, that's going to take a long time.
The worst thing is going to be by hand.
Yeah.
If we could electronically vote, boom, 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 right?
Yeah.
But there'll be a lot of lobbying in the hallways. I suppose for number 6, the right to life one, I'm sure Jana Myrdal.
Well, there's one in there about carbon pipelines too.
Yep.
Which, by the way, I mean, Governor Burgum's, I mean, whatever. And listen, there's Republicans and Democrats on both sides of those issues. Yep. I mean, it's a complex issue, and I understand it. I happen to be supportive of the pipeline. I think that critics of the pipeline make some decent points. I just, in my mind, it's not enough to get me over the hump to opposing it. But I mean, here you're taking a position that Republicans are. I mean, the governor is 100% for the pipeline. So. Again, I mean, it's just another situation where I don't. It seems very presumptuous for this relatively small group of people to speak for all Republicans in this way.
Yes, that'll be an interesting one with eminent domain, the carbon capture, resolution number 7, I believe it is.
Yeah. I don't think this convention is going to be over till Tuesday is what I'm thinking is going to happen.
Well, and I just want to draw attention to one other one, the number 14 resolution in support of religious freedom. I think we're all for religious freedom, but this really is more about being opposed to same-sex marriage and marriage equality. I don't know if the GOP thinks that they should be able to go back in time and disavow marriages that have taken place in the state. But again, I think this is something that I thought we're past. But again, this one passed unanimously. And again, Kelly Armstrong has voted to codify marriage equality. A lot of other Republicans support marriage equality. To me, again, these things, they're not, I think of resolutions and platforms as something that the whole party should agree with.
Or at least some like a majority or like a consensus. Majority. Yeah.
But these just seem to be like, I can see the wedge on each side of this thing. And I just, I just don't think it's beneficial to the NDGOP to be having this discussion going into a very, very important convention. So anyway, those are just more thoughts, again, more than a question, Jim. I mean, are you going to ever agree to co-chair this committee again?
Oh yeah, if I'm asked to, I'll help out Michael LaFleur. He's been good to me, and like I said, I was chosen. I don't know if Rob heard that. Mike came to me and asked me if I would co-chair this. He said, because I work well with people, I'm good at listening, I'm respectful to others' opinions, and
yeah.
And
well, I think those are, and it gets back, I think, to the point we made earlier, where it's not that we're against people who have some of these views coming to the it's their process too. When we say you have to represent all constituents, I mean, that's what I mean. I guess I just feel like if you're going to make a policy statement and the expectation is everybody's going to be loyal to it, it should be a process with more rigorous than this. I think all this is doing is creating problems for the party and creating discord where maybe there doesn't need to be.
Right. A good point.
Anyway, Jim, unless you have anything else to say, I really appreciate your time coming on. I know it's tough to get you since you oppose some of these, but I really appreciate you coming on and talking about the process and how we got here. I do appreciate that.
Yeah, and Jim, thanks for your leadership in the legislature and also on the school board. Those are tough jobs, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And once again, let's get to where we work together, Democrats, the far right, the moderates, to make the quality of life better for the citizens of North Dakota. That's my goal in the legislature. And there are many Republicans that follow the same ideas I do.
I think you're right, Jim.
Thanks.
I think you're right, Jim. Thank you. All right, just finished up with Jim Jonas, and I didn't want to beat up on Jim too much because, I think the argument here is more process. I'm not, even though I find a lot of these resolutions, the whereases, as you pointed out, are factually incorrect, so they're based on phony premises. Some of them I think are motivated; they're kind of mean-spirited. Right. I think some of them are fundamentally counterproductive. As an advocate for school choice, I don't think you get that ball over the end line by vilifying public schools. North Dakota, by and large, has very good public schools. We could point to some that could be doing better. Any large system is going to have people who are below average. But on the whole, here in Minot, we have excellent public schools. And if somebody starts an argument to me by belittling our public schools in Minot, I would immediately start to think that they're not a very credible person because they just clearly don't know a lot about our public schools in Minot to know that we're doing a pretty good job here.
So I had a legislator reach out after these became somewhat public and said, "Hey, there's a school choice resolution. Will you let me know your thoughts?" I was like, the NDGOP has on their platform, whatever, big deal. And then I read it, and the thing about indoctrinating students, it hurts the ability to recruit and retain good teachers. You're exactly right. We can have a conversation about if school choice makes sense or not. I obviously don't think it makes sense for most communities in North Dakota.
But we can have a good faith argument that doesn't begin with our public schools are evil and trying to indoctrinate children.
Right.
I think we can argue, well, I think that allowing parents to have some choices, like public school is a choice, a good and adequately funded public school is a choice. Let's see if we can create some other choices. I don't think that's a bad thing. Now, you agree, and I don't want to have a school choice debate right now.
Oh, but in the other thing, in that resolution, it basically says give us school choice without any government oversight. Like there should be no regulation.
Right.
We can't have a public system with all this regulation and then give the same amount of money to a private system with no regulation at all.
Also, if you're afraid of your kids being indoctrinated, but then you also want to send them to a religious school or a homeschool consortium or something with no oversight, that's a recipe for indoctrination as well. I mean, I think, one thing, like with my kids, I have always been, obviously I have very strong convictions and very strong political views. I make a living out of telling people about them. But I mean, with my kids, like I want them to go out and experience the world. I want them to agree with me, not because they've never heard anything else, but because they understand my arguments and they feel like they're the right ones. And I'm not afraid for my kids to disagree with me. So there's a whole attitude there that I think school choice policy could be a good thing, but not for the reasons they think it could be a good thing. But now this is going to be the official position of the Republican Party. And there's some that feel every lawmaker, every elected Republican has to hone to this position. No, come on.
And I've talked to a lot of school choice advocates in the legislature in the last week, or heard about them having conversations with folks who are angry about this because, like you said, it sort of takes their position. It takes away the high ground of having the conversation of, this is about parents' choices, whatever. And I've talked to people who support school choice as well, that even the conversations at the legislature, they so often, and not from like the organizations, but from individuals, they so often focus on public schools are terrible, teachers are terrible, whatever. And it's like, that's not what the reality of most parents are experiencing. And again, Representative Carls voted for this thing in my district. I encourage her, go to a public school. Spend some time in your district at public schools. This is not what's happening there.
It's the same dynamic as with the abortion resolution, because again, you have somebody in Jana Myrdal who like her or agree with her or disagree with her, has been one of the most effective advocates for pro-life policy in North Dakota. She is upset because this resolution that is quote-unquote a pro-life position takes positions that she opposes. She does not want to arrest women for getting an abortion. She doesn't want to arrest cab drivers who bring a woman to a clinic to get an abortion. She doesn't want to, at this point, her argument to me, when I had a lengthy conversation with her about it, and I reported much of it in the column, but some of the things she was saying to me was like, listen, we've gotten further on this project than we ever have before. Like Roe v. Wade is gone, right? North Dakota's pro-life laws are there. She says, what we ought to be focused on now is making it so that women don't feel the need to choose abortion. And this is something that I think a lot of Democrats could get on board with too, because you can set aside how you feel about abortion and say, let's make sure the safety net for pregnant mothers who are maybe financially challenged or social in an awkward social situation or something. Let's make sure that they have an adequate safety net, and let's make sure that after they have the babies, there's a safety net for the baby and the mom together, and that we make it easy for them to choose pregnancy. Let's work on adoption. Are there things we can fix about adoption?
Let's make adoption affordable.
Yes.
Let's make adoption affordable.
That's where Jana says she wants to work on those areas of law to the extent that those things can be solved in North Dakota. Obviously, some of them are federal and maybe beyond the scope of the legislature, but even so, that's where she wants to focus, and that makes a lot of sense to me. She says, I don't oppose IVF. Right? But yet the language of the resolution says life begins at fertilization, not conception. Well, that's putting IVF on the table. So,
right.
when you have your Nobody probably, there are very few people you could point to who have moved the ball down the field further for the pro-life cause in North Dakota than Jana Myrdal. And I realize a lot of people listening to this probably don't like that. They're, they don't.
Right. I don't like it, but it doesn't mean you're wrong.
But she's done it. She's done it. And now she's like, no, this is too far. Like, I don't know how Republicans can't look at that and say this process is a problem.
Well, and I don't know how you don't go through these resolutions and see it as a poke in the eye to the group of people you've talked about a lot, the traditional Republicans who have maintained a dominant political culture. I mean, you think about Resolution 7 on CO2 capture, number 8 on property taxes. These are pokes in the eye to Doug Burgum, to the vast majority of the legislature. I mean, again, I don't understand why you'd have a resolution where the leaders of your party disagree with it. Andrew Nias was on here last week or the week before and talked about the goal of the GOP is to win elections, not to have policy positions. Well, this is having policy positions.
Yeah.
This is not about winning elections.
I'm wondering, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about why the North Dakota Republican Party has essentially been in charge of North Dakota for more than 30 years. And I think that they feel like it's because they were like, it wasn't because they were passing bills to arrest pregnant women. That's not why. Like,
right.
if you think that's why, I think the voters are going to have a comeuppance, right? And there's a lot of partisan inertia and a lot of other forces at play. I'm not saying that just immediately the voters are going to take a turn, because part of it is the Democrats giving some of these voters a place to go, which we can have a whole other show about whether or not the Democratic Party in North Dakota is doing a good job of that. But I don't like, moderate leadership is why the party has been there. Pragmatic leadership, a focus on serving constituencies, is why the Republican Party has been there for so long. And the further they get away from that, the more they're going to start to lose elections.
Rob, the last thing you would hear coming out of the mouths of people like Ed Schaefer, John Hoeven, and Jack Dalrymple is attacking North Dakota's public schools. They champion public schools because they knew we had good public schools, and our public schools are better than most.
And don't get me wrong, they supported reforms, right?
Of course,
they weren't Pollyannish, pie in the sky, ignoring real challenges and real problems.
But they were not whereasing that teachers are indoctrinating children, right? I mean, that's not where they were. They were trying to make schools better, and they supported public schools. They supported public school teachers and administrators. And again, to your point, not because they didn't want to make them better.
Right.
I mean, Hoeven did a lot of work on public education and making it better, but not by demonizing it.
By the way, I would remind people who supporting this resolution that providing a system of public education is a mandate in the state constitution. We're required to do it. So this idea that we're going to pass school, just abandon our public schools, not only a bad idea in a matter of policy, specifically illegal under the state constitution. We are obliged, we are obligated, we are required to provide that school system. And I don't want that part of the Constitution to go anywhere. We should provide that. That is a basic building block of a successful and prosperous society.
And let's feed them lunch while they're there at no cost.
Well,
what do you say, Rob?
There we go. Yeah, I'm on board too. You make me send the kid to schools. I mean, you may as well. We may as well feed them too.
Maybe give them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every now and again.
I still maintain we want to talk about relief for working families. Pay for the school lunches. I'm paying a couple of $1,000 a year for it. Much more than I pay in income taxes.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. And I don't, you're the only person who talks about that.
Yeah.
Like, people talk about, like, on my side, they're like, oh, it's the right thing to do. But there's an economic piece of this. And you're right. Eliminating income taxes would do less for you than paying for your kids' school.
I would do both, to be fair.
Yeah.
I would do both. But that's me. Well, Port's all over the map. He's with the Democrats on the school lunches and the conservatives on the income tax.
As long as it's putting more money in Rob Port's pocket, he's happy.
I am for it. Yes. Well, what am I supposed to do? I'm voting for my self-interest. All right. What else do we want to talk about? Tom Campbell out of the House race. That surprise you?
Wow.
It was abrupt.
Well, it surprises me in the fact that we had him on just last week and he was attacking anybody who he thought were suggesting he should leave. And then you had to call him the next day, which was
because I had to follow up on him because he was like,
yeah.
he was saying that people were threatening him. Threat's a strong word. And so, we put up the podcast and I was kind of a little taken aback when he used it and we didn't. So I wanted to follow up on him. Like, let's explore that. Like, people are threatening you. What does that mean?
Right.
And I wrote the column and he's asserting. Now, he couldn't name anybody that did it. In fact, according to what he told me, he didn't talk to anybody who actually made the threat. Somebody on his staff did. And Tom apparently doesn't even know the person's name. So I don't know. Make of that what you will.
Yeah, maybe the idea of going up on a podcast on public about rumors or hearsay from your campaign isn't the smartest thing to do. But
it doesn't. It would not surprise me at all that Tom was getting pressure to pull out. That doesn't surprise me at all. There's lots of people who felt that way. I talked to them. They were concerned about the triangulation between Campbell, Fedorchak, and Becker. And they're looking at the fact that there's a lot of overlap among normie Republicans, probably between people who support Campbell and people who support Fedorchak. They were completely understandably concerned that the only thing Campbell could accomplish in this race is poleaxing Fedorchak and putting Rick Becker in the North Dakota House, the U.S. House of Representatives.
I can't wrap my head around Tom Campbell is seen as a traditional sort of and I think you and I have talked. It's more about style than it is an actual policy. He's a banker, right?
He took some pretty moderate votes in the state Senate, but yeah, sure, he was a conservative guy. But also remember the normie definition of what constitutes a conservative traditional Republican is out the window. And also, let's all be honest. A lot of it's about style. One of the things that I was just talking about to somebody earlier today about. Some of the same-sex marriage issues and how, like, the resolution where we're just, like, really, really... Donald Trump endorsed gay marriage before Barack Obama did. So a lot of this, like, we're trying to look at this through the lens of, like, policy, and a lot of it's just about mood. A lot of it's just about temperament. And Tom Campbell does not have the Trumpy temperament. Julie Fedorchak does not have the Trumpy temperament. Rick Becker does.
And I'd say Julie's pretty darn conservative too.
Very conservative.
It's not like she's some squishy liberal by any stretch of the imagination.
No, very conservative, but also in terms of style, not a Trump person. She endorsed Donald Trump and all that stuff. This gets so complicated.
So, Rob, I did notice that I think it was the Tribune has a profile of Becker in the paper today where he referenced himself wanting to go to Washington and be a bull in a china shop. Is that what we need? Is another one of those in Washington?
We're already to the point where, what is the dysfunction in the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives has already, before we've even had an election, has already nearly cost them the majority. They are down to 2 votes, a 2-vote majority. And the reason why is normie Republicans are leaving. Right, a lot of them are
early,
and not just like I'm going to be done at the end of my term. Like I'm leaving in 2 weeks.
Well, and Ken Buck down in Colorado went as far as leaving in 2 weeks just to sort of hurt Lauren Boebert, who's trying to move over into his seat, so she couldn't run for the special election. So it's not a fun place to be. And there's another Wisconsin one that just dropped out in the last couple of weeks.
I'm forgetting the name now.
Gallagher, I think his name is.
Yeah.
Then that's what brought it down to 2. So when you start talking about, we've talked about Kelly Armstrong running for governor and being in Congress, he has to be in Congress.
Yeah.
There's a 2-vote majority.
Yeah, he can't afford to miss any
vote
votes.
Is needed.
Yeah. So, but that's sort of, and the thing is we're going to send Rick Becker. I wish he would just cool it with some of that stuff. Like, I wish he would just bring the policy stuff. We can have a good debate with Rick Becker. I think, unfortunately, he's abandoned a lot of the policies and the philosophies that attracted me to him early on in his legislative career. He would probably accuse me of becoming a liberal, but I don't know. I do wish, instead of all this stuff about I'm going to go to Washington and be a bull in a china closet, I think we've sent enough wrecking balls to Washington, D.C.
When you talk about how Becker's changed, I think when Becker came in, he was sort of the true libertarian. that there are some places where on things like protect employment and housing protection for LGBTQ folks that he was on board with. Sort of the idea that the
criminal justice reform. Yeah,
completely changed on a lot of those things. I
remember, I mean, he went from being a very thoughtful person who was very much in support of stuff like that to like mocking refugees coming to Fargo because, you know, everybody was hopped up about that and upset. And I had things to say about that too. I think the process that we use for that sometimes doesn't serve refugees well, but it was, I mean, he like dressed up as Santa Claus and like was making fun of them. And but I mean, that's the mood. I mean, when he says to go to be a bull in a china shop in Washington, D.C., I mean, let's not be, there's a part of the Republican base that wants that. I mean, he's saying that for a reason. I mean, when we say about like there's a mood that people are supporting, that's the mood.
Right. And he also got an endorsement from a U.S. senator that I'd actually heard of, Rand Paul.
Yeah. Although the verbiage was exactly the same, almost
as all those members of Congress,
as every other endorsement that he's had. So it's like they're not putting a lot of work into this. Like they're just copy pasted whatever. Yeah. But whatever. I mean, I'm sure it's real. I'm sure he's endorsing him.
So Fedorchuk's going to the convention, right?
Yes.
So she'll come out of that with the nomination. Kelly will likely come out of it.
Assuming Becker, I mean, again, I mean, there's going to be lots of weirdness. Like I'm hearing, for instance, in District 37, one of the first things that they're going to have to do is District 7 has 50 or 60 delegates. Now that's House Majority Leader Mike LaFleur's home district over in Dickinson. There has now been a complaint filed, and last night, I think it was, the credentialing committee voted to put this in front of the convention. So one of the first things the convention is going to have to do is vote on whether or not the 50 or 60 roughly normie delegates from District 37 even get to be seated. There is going to be so many shenanigans at this convention. And the idea, like, you know, you could see Sandy Sanford, the chair of the party, get replaced, and then maybe the rules get suspended, and all of a sudden, if you have a parliamentarian and a convention chair that'll play ball with it, now Rick Becker's in the mix. And if Rick Becker gets in the mix, maybe he wins at the convention.
Sure.
So, yes, if Rick Becker's, I mean, Campbell's out, Rick Becker's not on it. All due respect to Alex Belaise, I don't see him getting it done. Yes, but if Rick Becker gets on the ballot at the convention,
it's a whole nother story.
It's a whole different ball game.
Wow.
Yeah, and by the way, I haven't written about this yet. So maybe by the time people have listened to this podcast, I'll have written about it. But and by the way, I think what they're doing to Mike LaFleur, I think that's all about sticking it to Mike LaFleur. And I think they're sticking it to Mike LaFleur because he. So the thing is that they didn't select it. They didn't select their delegates right. And what they did essentially is they had a slate of delegates and then a slate of alternatives. They put it in front of their meeting, and then they called for any more endorsements of delegates from the floor. Nobody nominated anybody else from the floor. So they then said, okay, let's hold a vote. Instead of voting on each individual delegate, then we'll just vote on this whole slate. They held a vote on the slate. The slate passed. Those are the delegates. So the party is now saying, some elements of the party now saying, well, that's not good enough. You didn't follow the rules. And so, you know, but then now the people in District 37 are telling me, well, the party didn't follow the rules because they didn't notify the delegates so they can't show up. But one person from District 37 made the point to me, they're in Dickinson. The convention's in Fargo, right? That's probably $1,000 weekend. By the time you drive there, you get a hotel room, you pay the convention fees, you pay for food and all that stuff. How many are even going to show up?
Miles road trip,
right? To go and to find out in the first hour of the convention that you're out.
So who's the district chair in that district? Is it Baszler?
It is Mitch Baszler. Yes. It's Kirsten Baszler's son.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if there's some Kirsten Baszler stuff going on there as well.
Yeah, maybe they don't. I can't speak to that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do think it's about Mike LaFleur, and I think it's about Mike LaFleur taking the stand he took on Nico Rios. I think that's it. He came out and he took a tough stand on Nico Rios. Nico Rios is one of theirs. Now they're punishing the House Majority Leader by essentially locking his delegates out from the convention.
So passing a bunch of resolutions to poke Burgum in the eye, locking out the House Majority Leader.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's something. It's something.
Yeah,
I'm not kidding. I don't think this convention's going to be over till Tuesday. I mean, I don't see how.
When does it start? Does it start on Friday?
It starts on Saturday, April 5th.
Oh, okay. And is it the Shield Center? Or where's
no, never mind. I take that back. It starts on Friday. It does start on Friday. That's April 5th.
And where's it at?
The Shack.
Oh, the Shack. Okay.
In Fargo. I think that's right. Hey, please don't go look at the NDGOP. I know it's April 5th, but please go look at the NDGOP website and I don't want to be accused of misleading people. If we don't get the location, all this stuff right. I'm going to be there. I'm attending. I just don't have the info right in front of me, but I'm not trying to mislead people.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I enjoyed your column on librarians, by the way, talking about last session, focusing on things that didn't matter in the your follow-up on figuring out how many books have actually been moved, being really limited. Maybe we can stop attacking librarians now. Do you think that'll happen?
I think it'll only happen insofar as some other MacGuffin will come along that they all get wrapped around, and I think they'll just forget it. Like nominally, they'll say, oh yeah, they're still trying to indoctrinate our kids. But there'll be some other shiny object that they'll be chasing this next legislative session. That just kind of seems like how we jump, like we jump from Common Core to whatever. I mean, it's one outrage we're all supposed to get wrapped around the axle about after another.
Yeah, Common Core, then SEL training, then DEI is one of them. Being woke in general. I mean, it's what's the big one? Where the race one? Critical race theory.
Critical race theory. How could I forget that? Given it's been pounded into our
track
skulls.
Of all the things we're angry about, Rob.
I know.
It's hard.
I'm not that angry a person, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean that's where we're at. I mean honestly, the Democratic convention is going to be going on at the same time, and I want to go there. I don't know how in the heck I'm going to be able to get across town to even put in an appearance and notionally cover the Democratic convention when this is going to be going on at the Republican convention. I mean, it's going to be one thing after another.
Rob, I will be at the Democrat convention. I'll text you anything that is happening over there. If there's I've tried to get a guest pass to the GOP, and I've been unsuccessful up to this point. So if anybody's out there listening, can hook me up.
They gave you one last time.
Yeah, you got me a press pass, though. I think that there's different relationships you might have with the GOP leadership now compared to 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's true. They gave me one, to their credit. I was actually thinking that they were gonna try to lock me out too, and
I'm actually a little surprised they did give you one.
Somebody, if I could share a funny anecdote, somebody told me that at a recent meeting of the state committee, that they were talking about. It was like credentialing or something. They were worried about Democrats getting in, because I'm sure Democrats are just anxious to break down the doors and get into this or something.
So hold on, to be delegates or just to be there observing?
I'm not sure what the context was, but it was something about Democrats being in the room, and it was like somebody cracked out at the meeting, like, "Well, Rob Port's going to be there," so because me being the Democrat, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of remarkable.
See all the time, you liberal, you commie, you pinko. It's just you've just been faking this conservative thing for decades now, just to infiltrate the North Dakota GOP convention. I mean, if you
roll back the clock, you could find things I wrote in like 2006 saying legalizing same-sex marriage is the conservative position.
It is.
I want to limit government to the point where consenting adults can marry one another, and the government's not going to prevent it.
If two adults want to enter into a contract, why should the government tell them they can't?
I mean, I mean, honestly, polygamy is not for me. But if multiple adults want to enter into a contract with one another, I don't have a problem with that. If it's consenting and everybody's above board, I don't have. More power to you. It's not my. I mean, to me, that's the limited government position. Now, that's libertarian Rob. There's probably people out there like, Port, pump the brakes.
If your headline on this podcast is not "Port calls for legal polygamy," I'm going to be devastated.
I am in the public record for that, like long back. So I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise. I think the problem is I'm just not on board with the guy who's leading the party right now, like Donald Trump, and for that, it's a sin. And I mean, let's be honest. There's not. I mean, if we can, bring it all the way back around to what we started talking about at the beginning, there's not a lot of appetite for different points of view among many members of the Republican Party. Not all members, because people like Jim Jonas still want to sit down and have the conversations. But there's a lot of people.
Another example of that, though, is we had a legislative candidate from District 18 on, Scott Schofield, a couple months ago, who was running as a Republican. It's my understanding he lost at the convention.
Yep.
And if you remember, he had some really moderate positions when it came to things like choice and LGBTQ, abortion, I should say. We've been talking about school choice. I should probably be careful about how I describe choice. And he lost at the convention, and he was super impressive from my perspective.
I thought he was very thoughtful. I thought he was very interesting. And even a couple of his things were a little too far left, even for me, in terms of policy. But I mean, I don't know. I don't think that the Republican Party could continue to enjoy the supermajority that it does if it doesn't make room for people like me in the party who see the world like I do, or people like Scott, or is not willing to have a process that tries to build a consensus. I mean, to me, that's been the great strength. All the time, Democrats complain, Republicans stole our bill. Who cares? If it's a good idea, who cares whose idea it is?
And the other thing, I don't know if you saw that the Republican nominees in District 46, that's the Jim Casper, Shannon Rohr, Jim Rohr's district. Jim not running again, by the way. Right. And Jim and Shannon were replaced by super far social issue sort of nominees there as well. So if the Republicans win those seats, it's a step backwards for traditional Republicans.
Well, it's going to be interesting what happened. That district's always been, now I don't know. I mean, maybe it's changed over the years.
I think it's still purplish.
But it's been a pretty purple district. And I think one of the reasons, Jim Casper's been riding the coattails of moderate Republicans in that district for a long time. It was Shannon Rohr Jones. Before him, it was Kathy Hawken. He's been riding some coattails there for a while. It's going to be interesting when he doesn't have those moderate coattails. What's going to happen?
And a couple of the Dems candidates are really good there in District 46. So I think it will be an interesting election. I think it's going to be a real, again, it's going to come down to if nobody runs in the GOP primary against these very conservative folks, if it is the current nominees of both parties, what do traditional Republicans do? Do they go in and are they willing to vote for pretty good Democratic candidates? Or are they going to just stick with the party line and continue to send, Bastiat, sort of legislators who want to focus on social issues? There's some bellwethers in this state.
I don't want to. And I don't mean this to be mean to Democrats, but I would rather conservative Republicans be in charge. Like, that's what I prefer. That being said, I don't know that anything is going to bring order back to the Republican Party than losing some elections. Like a demonstration that going down this road is how you lose elections. I think it's going to have to get to that point. Or we're going to have something bad happen because the legislature dropped the ball because they're so busy getting their skirts over their heads about a book in a library somewhere that they drop the ball on something else, and there's a serious consequence for the state of North Dakota, and then they start to lose elections. I don't want any of that to happen. I don't want North Dakota to be hurt. I don't really want Democrats to win elections, but I feel like that's the only thing that's going to cause change.
It's really interesting. I thought we were going to see change after the 2014 election, and now I'm going to bring listeners back in the day, but only two Republican incumbents lost that election cycle, Betty Grandy and Margaret City. Both of them were seen as people who focused a lot on social issues.
Yeah.
Aaron Oban and Pam Anderson beat the two of them. I thought we were going to see a change after that where Republicans would focus more on sort of kitchen table issues, the things that we talk about a lot here. But instead, it feels like it's gone just the opposite way, that even they're going deeper into social issues.
And I think a lot of it is just the way national politics has just flooded the zone over
that was pre-Trump.
Right. So, that was pre-Trump. we've seen a backlash, and I would say some of it is a backlash to, things that have happened on the left. Now, I don't want to say that these are things that are happening everywhere, but I mean, there is a part of the left that thinks people should be like fired from their job if they accidentally use the wrong pronoun or something. Like there's that element to the left. I think they're in some ways like the national stories where we're trying to put a cake, run a bakery shop at a business because they want to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. The way the left has elevated some of those issues, I think, has created a backlash. And I think that's very much a part of the Trump movement.
We talked about it a few weeks ago after Biden's State of the Union, when people on the left were criticizing him for saying illegal immigrant instead of undocumented worker.
They're illegal. I mean, they're also undocumented workers. Both terms are correct. One has a harder
Either
edge
way,
to it.
We all know who you're talking about. Why would you attack your guy?
Right.
It just doesking make any sense.
It's really hard. I mean, one of the tough arguments, if you want to argue that like the Trump movement is a threat to democracy, and I believe that, I'm looking, and it's a choice between Joe Biden, who I don't think is a very good president, I know you do, or the guy who tried to pull off a coup. I don't know. I mean, that's a choice we're putting in front of Americans. So I think he is a threat to democracy. But then Democrats need to act like that's true. And getting again, like fainting into the bushes because Joe Biden said illegal immigrant is not demonstrating to me that you understand or that you believe how much of a threat Donald Trump is. You're not demonstrating that to me with your actions and your words. And I think that's a problem for Democrats.
Rob, I've talked to a lot of sort of Democrats about the GOP primaries here. And it's really interesting, like when I talk about the two candidates running for governor, and I think there are some differences on things I care about. The vast majority of people I talk about say it doesn't matter, they support Trump. So I think a lot of Democrats do sort of understand that, it's at, that is sort of their litmus test. Either you're for Trump or you're against Trump. It frustrates me to a certain extent because I think we do need to be a little more pragmatic than that when we're voting. But I think Trump is, we know he's polarizing, but now the people sort of, kissing the ring of Trump is making it even more polarizing for all Republicans and all Democrats moving forward. And I don't know. I'm ready for this election cycle to be over and hope things get better, but I'm not hopeful.
Yeah, well, I'm not either. But hey, we got to end it there. It's been an hour. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
One last thing.
Yeah.
What are you doing tomorrow?
I'm watching some baseball tomorrow. Opening day.
Real opening day.
Yeah, that's actual opening day, not
Korean opening day.
Right. Although I will say, if we're going to talk baseball for a minute, I really enjoyed the series at the end, and the Yankees ended up with some injuries and stuff. We didn't exactly send the A squad down to Mexico, but I really enjoyed the games down there against the Diablos Rojas of Rojas. I don't know.
And Trevor Bauer just made the Yankees look like idiots, right? I mean, he dominated.
Robinson Cano smoking a home run too, former Yankee, who we let go and had PED problems. But I enjoyed that. I really like the international aspect of baseball. From my perspective, I'm trying to think maybe hockey, like after soccer, and maybe hockey. Like baseball is one of the most international sports there is.
So I love the Dodgers-Padres series in Korea. First of all, waking up at 5 in the morning to watch baseball is best. But they have like cheerleaders. Yeah. They like the fan interaction is different.
The ones in like Latin America too, like the horn and the chants and the dances and everything. It is so much fun. I even enjoyed when the Yankees went over and played in London, even though they were playing in like a cricket field, and it ended up being. It was a different game because it was like they were scoring like 15 runs a game. I mean, it was crazy, but it was fun to bring like this quintessentially American thing and share it with the world. And it's not really quintessentially American anymore. When you look at, I love how it is. I think it would be fun. I would need to think about it more. But like, what if we put like a franchise in Mexico City, right? How fun would that be? I think that'd be cool.
So I actually talked to somebody about that. It is actually like somebody who's played Major League Baseball before. And I talked about that. And you know what their response was?
What?
As a pitcher, I have no interest in having a team in Mexico City with the altitude.
If you don't know, Mexico City is is, but we have one in Denver, but
Yeah.
I think Mexico City might even be higher. I mean, it's really high altitude there.
Yeah, so the assessment of Major League Baseball pitchers is nope, let's stay at sea level.
Well, they are just one part of the vote on
Yeah,
this.
there you go.
I think it would be fun. Maybe a couple of teams, like maybe add two, like another city in Mexico. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Anyway, we're gonna stop talking about baseball. I'm sure most of our audience is tuned out by now, so
They know when to stop listening.
they know when to stop. When we start on the baseball, it's like, okay, the interesting stuff's over, and these two jokers are going to talk about baseball. All right, we're going to let you go there. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.